Cordelia Ashworth's gloved hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled telegram that had changed everything 3 days ago. The train's whistle shrieked through the Montana wilderness, and she pressed her face to the soot-stained window, watching. Unfamiliar peaks rise like ancient sentinels. This wasn't supposed to be her stop. Cedar Falls was still another 50 miles north, but the conductor's gruff voice had already called, "Last stop, all passengers off." The wooden platform groaned under her boots as she stepped down, her traveling case heavy in one hand, the other still gripping that damn telegram. Around her, the small crowd of passengers dispersed like dandelion seeds on the wind, leaving her alone with the mountain silence and her growing panic. Willowbrook Station wasn't even on her map. "You look mighty lost, miss." The voice belonged to a weathered man with kind eyes who emerged from the station house. "I'm Station Master Horace Pembridge. You expecting someone?" Before Cordelia could answer, a blur of calico dress and flying braids crashed into her skirts. Small arms wrapped around her legs with desperate strength, and a tear-streaked face looked up at her with eyes the color of summer storm clouds. "Are you her? Are you the lady who's going to marry my daddy?" The child couldn't have been more than 7, but her voice carried the weight of someone much older. "Please say yes. Please don't go away like all the others." Cordelia's heart lurched. The telegram had been clear. Jeremiah Blackthorne of Cedar Falls sought a bride, someone willing to help raise his motherless daughter. But this wasn't Cedar Falls, and she wasn't supposed to meet them for hours yet. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a mistake." "No." The little girl's grip tightened. "You can't go. Daddy's been waiting and waiting, and he gets so sad when he thinks I don't see. Yesterday I found him crying over Mama's picture again, and he thought I was sleeping, but I wasn't. And he whispered that maybe God didn't want us to be happy anymore." The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. She knelt down, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "What's your name, little one?" "Magnolia Blackthorne, but everybody calls me Maggie." The girl's lower lip trembled. "Daddy says I'm named after the tree where he first kissed Mama, back before the fever took her." Station Master Pembridge cleared his throat. "Miss, if you're the bride meant for Jeremiah Blackthorne, you've gotten off one stop too early. Cedar Falls is the next town over, but—" He glanced at Maggie's desperate face. "There's been some trouble up that way. Bridge washout from the spring floods. No trains running through for at least a week." Cordelia felt the ground shift beneath her feet like quicksand. A week stranded in the wrong town, with no way to reach her intended husband, and this heartbroken child clinging to her as if she were the answer to every prayer. "My daddy's the best daddy in the whole world," Maggie whispered, her small hand finding Cordelia's. "But he's so lonely it makes my chest hurt. And I need a mama so bad sometimes I pretend my pillow is her and tell it all my secrets." The tears came then, both from the child and unexpectedly from Cordelia herself. She thought of the cramped Boston tenement she'd fled, the empty promises of men who'd courted her purse rather than her heart, the desperate letter she'd written to a stranger in Montana territory. Maybe getting off at the wrong stop wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe it was exactly where she needed to be. Maggie's small hand felt like a lifeline as she led Cordelia through the dusty streets of Willowbrook. The town wasn't much a general store, a saloon with painted shutters, a whitewashed church that had seen better days, but the mountains embraced it like protective arms, and something about the place whispered of new beginnings. "Mrs. Henley runs the boarding house," Maggie chattered, her earlier tears replaced by determined cheerfulness. "She makes the best apple fritters this side of creation, and she'll let you stay even if you don't have much money." "I know, 'cause she did that for the widow Peterson when her husband died in the mine cave-in." Cordelia's heart clenched at the child's easy assumption that she would stay. "Maggie, sweetheart, you understand I was supposed to meet your father in Cedar Falls? I have an arrangement with him, but you're here now," Maggie interrupted with. The unshakable logic of childhood. And Daddy always says God works in mysterious ways. Maybe he knew Daddy needed you here instead of there. The boarding house stood at the end of Main Street, a rambling two-story structure with gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch where late afternoon shadows gathered like old friends. Mrs. Henley turned out to be a sturdy woman with flour-dusted hands and eyes that missed nothing. So you're the mail-order bride got herself turned around, she said without preamble, looking Cordelia up and down like she was evaluating a horse for purchase. Maggie Blackthorne, does your daddy know you're dragging strange women around town? Maggie's chin jutted out defiantly. She's not strange. She's perfect. And Daddy's working the north pasture with the new foal, so he won't be back till supper time. That gives us a few hours to sort this mess out, Mrs. Henley declared, ushering them inside. The boarding house smelled of cinnamon and beeswax, with lace curtains that filtered the mountain light into golden streams. Child, you go fetch Dr. Whitmore. Tell him we need to send a telegram to Cedar Falls. Let them know their expected bride is safe but delayed. As Maggie scampered off, Mrs. Henley turned her attention to Cordelia. Now then, what's your story? And don't give me any polite nonsense. A woman doesn't travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger unless she's running from something or toward something equally urgent. Cordelia found herself telling this woman things she'd never spoken aloud. About her father's gambling debts that had left her homeless. About the men in Boston who'd seen only her inheritance and not her heart. About the desperate loneliness that had driven her to answer Jeremiah Blackthorne's advertisement in the matrimonial pages. He wrote such beautiful letters, she whispered, pulling the carefully preserved correspondence from her reticule. Listen to this. I offer not wealth but honest work. Not grand society, but a home where laughter echoes again, not pretty words, but a heart that remembers how to hope. How could I not come? Mrs. Henley's expression softened. Jeremiah's a good man. Lost his wife Isabel to the influenza 3 winters back, and it near broke him. That little girl's been trying to hold them both together ever since. Through the window, they watched. Maggie skipped back down the street, her braids flying. She burst through the door like a small cyclone, cheeks flushed with excitement. Dr. Whitmore says the telegraph lines to Cedar Falls are down too, on account of the same storm that took out the bridge, she announced breathlessly. And guess what? Daddy's coming to town for supplies tomorrow morning, and I can introduce you proper like. Cordelia felt panic rise in her throat. Maggie, you can't just spring me on your father like a surprise package. He's expecting to meet me in Cedar Falls, under proper circumstances, but these are proper circumstances, Maggie insisted. You're here, he's here, and Mrs. Henley makes the best matchmaking apple pie in 3 counties. Don't you, Mrs. Henley? The older woman chuckled despite herself. Child's got a point. Sometimes fate needs a little nudge in the right direction. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Cordelia found herself caught between terror and anticipation. Tomorrow she would meet the man she'd traveled so far to marry, but not as his expected bride stepping off a train dock. She would meet him as a stranger who'd been claimed by his daughter's desperate love, in a town that wasn't supposed to be her destination, with no way to retreat even if her courage failed her. Perhaps that was exactly how the best love stories began. Cordelia barely slept, her mind churning with 100 different scenarios for the morning's meeting. When dawn broke over the mountains, she was already dressed in her finest traveling dress, deep blue wool with pearl buttons, her hair arranged in the most becoming style she could manage with shaking hands. Mrs. Henley had been up even earlier, and the boarding house kitchen smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee. Eat something, the older woman commanded, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before Cordelia. Can't meet your intended husband looking like you've been gnawed by wolves. What? If he takes one look at me and decides the whole arrangement is a mistake? Cordelia pushed the food around her plate, her stomach too nervous for eating. What if he's angry that I got off at the wrong stop? What if you stop borrowing trouble and trust that child's instincts? Mrs. Henley interrupted. Maggie. Blackthorn's got more sense in her little finger than most adults have in their whole bodies. If she thinks you belong here, there's probably something to it. Through the window, they could see the town stirring to life. The blacksmith's hammer rang out across the morning air, and smoke rose from chimneys like prayers ascending to heaven. It was then that Cordelia spotted him, a tall figure leading a wagon down Main Street, his dark hair catching the early light, her breath caught. Even from a distance, Jeremiah Blackthorn commanded attention. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his broad shoulders filling out a simple work shirt, his hands steady on the reins. That's him, Mrs. Henley confirmed unnecessarily. And here comes his little shadow. Maggie had spotted her father too and was racing down the street like her skirts were on fire. Cordelia watched through the lace curtains as the child launched herself into Jeremiah's arms, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward the boarding house, even. From this distance, Cordelia could see the moment Jeremiah's entire body went rigid. His head turned toward the boarding house, and though she couldn't make out his features clearly, she felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch. Best go out and face the music, Mrs. Henley advised gently. Hiding behind curtains never solved anything. Cordelia's legs felt unsteady as she walked out onto the porch. Jeremiah had left his wagon at the general store and was striding toward the boarding house, Maggie skipping alongside him, still chattering animatedly. Up close, he was even more imposing than she'd imagined. Tall and lean, with weathered hands. That spoke of honest work and eyes the same stormy blue-gray as his daughter's. His face was all strong lines and sharp angles, handsome in a rugged way that made her pulse quicken. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps and removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples. When he spoke, his voice was deep and carefully controlled. Miss Ashworth, I presume, Mr. Blackthorn. Cordelia descended the steps slowly, acutely aware of his scrutiny. I must apologize for the confusion. I intended to continue to Cedar Falls as arranged, but fate had other plans. Maggie piped up, bouncing between them like a small ambassador of hope. Daddy, isn't she prettier than you imagined? And Mrs. Henley says she makes the most beautiful needlework. And she knows French, and she's got the gentlest hands when she braided my hair this morning. Maggie? Jeremiah's voice was quiet but firm. Go help Mrs. Henley with breakfast preparations. But Daddy, now, sweetheart? Maggie's face fell, but she obeyed, casting one last pleading look over her shoulder as she disappeared into the boarding house. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind through the pines and the distant lowing of cattle. Jeremiah studied Cordelia with an intensity that made her want to squirm, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Cordelia's heart sank. I know I'm not particularly. You're younger then. Your letters suggested prettier too. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of leather and soap and something indefinably masculine. The question is, Miss Ashworth, what are your intentions now? You could wait for the bridge repairs and continue to Cedar Falls as planned, or ... Or? The word came out barely above a whisper. His eyes searched her face as if looking for something specific. Or you could stay here in Willowbrook and see if a marriage of convenience might become something more. The world seemed to hold its breath. Cordelia thought of Maggie's desperate plea, of the loneliness she'd glimpsed in this man's careful control, of her own heart that had been waiting so long to find a home. I'd like to stay, she said simply. Something shifted in Jeremiah's expression, a crack in that careful control, a glimpse of vulnerability quickly hidden. Then we'd best get to know each other properly, starting now. The next few days passed in a careful dance of discovery. Jeremiah would ride into town each morning, ostensibly for supplies or to check on business at the grain elevator. But Cordelia noticed he always found reasons to linger near the boarding house. Their conversations began formally discussions of practical matters like household management and Maggie's education, but gradually warmed into something deeper. "Tell me about Boston," he said one afternoon as they sat on Mrs. Henley's front porch, watching Maggie chase butterflies in the wildflower meadow across the street. "What made you decide to leave everything familiar behind?" Cordelia considered, her words carefully. "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Going through the motions of what was expected, but never feeling truly alive?" Jeremiah's hand stilled on the piece of wood he'd been whittling, a small horse. "For Maggie. After Isabel died, I felt like I was underwater. Everything seemed muffled and distant. Even Maggie's laughter couldn't quite reach me. And now?" Cordelia dared to ask. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something kindle in his storm-colored eyes. "Now I remember what it feels like to breathe again." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. But Maggie, bless her heart, had no such reservations. She'd taken to including Cordelia in every aspect of their routine, from morning prayers to bedtime stories, treating her like a mother who'd simply been delayed in arriving. "Miss Cordelia, will you teach me to make those little cakes like the ones in your picture books?" Maggie asked one evening as they sat by the fire in the boarding house parlor. "The ones with the pink roses on top." "Petits fours," Cordelia smiled. "I learned to make them from a French pastry chef in Boston. But we'd need special ingredients. I could ride to Billings for supplies," Jeremiah offered quietly. He'd been listening from his chair by the window, where he'd taken to spending his evenings, content to watch his daughter bloom under Cordelia's gentle attention. "If you'd write me a list." "You'd do that?" Cordelia turned to face him, touched by the offer. "It's a 2-day journey there and back. For Maggie's happiness, I'd ride to California." His voice was gruff, but his eyes were tender. "Besides, it would give you ladies time to plan whatever it is you whisper about when you think I'm not listening." Maggie giggled, not bothering to deny the conspiracy. She'd been matchmaking with all the subtlety of a small hurricane, arranging accidental encounters and creating situations that forced her father and Cordelia into closer proximity. The turning point came on Sunday morning. Cordelia had attended church services, sitting with Mrs. Henley while the Blackthorns occupied their usual pew 3 rows ahead. Reverend Mills had delivered a sermon about Ruth, and Naomi about choosing loyalty and love over safety and familiarity. After the service, as the congregation mingled in the churchyard, disaster struck in the form of Vernon Hutchins, the town banker. He was a thin, pale man with calculating eyes and a manner that made Cordelia's skin crawl. "So you're Blackthorn's mail-order bride," he said, cornering her near the rose bush while Jeremiah was distracted by a conversation with the feed store owner. "Mighty pretty thing. Makes a man wonder if Blackthorn appreciates what he's got." "Mr. Blackthorn and I have an understanding," Cordelia replied stiffly, trying to step around him. But Hutchins moved to block her path, his smile turning predatory. "Understanding can change, sweetheart. I'm a wealthy man could give you things a simple rancher never could. Silk dresses, trips to San Francisco, a house with real servants instead of playing nursemaid to another woman's brat." "How dare you?" Cordelia began, but her words were cut short by a low, dangerous voice. "Is there a problem here, Hutchins?" Jeremiah appeared beside them like an avenging angel, his body radiating barely leashed violence. He didn't touch Cordelia, but he positioned himself between her and the banker with unmistakable intent. Hutchins stepped back, his face flushing. "Just making conversation with the Lady Blackthorn. No harm in that." The lady seems uncomfortable with your conversation." Jaramir's voice could have frozen hellfire. "I suggest you find someone else to talk to." As Hutchins slunk away, muttering under his breath, Jaramir turned to Cordelia with concern replacing anger in his eyes. "Did he hurt you?" "No, just unsettled me." Cordelia found herself shaking, not from fear, but from the realization of how protected she felt in Jaramir's presence. "Thank you for intervening." "Always," he said simply, and the word carried the weight of a vow. That evening, as they walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Cordelia made a decision that would change everything. "Jaramir, there's something I need to tell you about my past, about why I really left Boston." He stopped walking, his attention completely focused on her. "I'm listening." And for the first time in her life, Cordelia felt ready to share the whole truth with someone who might actually understand. "My father was a gambler," Cordelia began, her voice barely audible in the mountain stillness. "Not the charming, roguish kind you read about in novels, but the desperate kind who pawns his daughter's mother's jewelry to place one more bet." They had reached the boarding house, but neither made a move to go inside. Instead, they stood in the shadow of the porch, where lamplight from the windows couldn't quite reach them, creating a pocket of privacy in the darkness. He accumulated debts to some very dangerous men, she continued, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. When he died, his heart gave out during a particularly unfortunate card game. Those debts became mine, along with some unwanted attention from men who thought a young woman alone in the world might be persuadable to work off what was owed. Jaramir's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her tell the story at her own pace. "I had enough money to buy passage west, barely. Your advertisement promised honesty and a home where laughter echoed again. After months of looking over my shoulder, of sleeping with a chair propped against my door, that sounded like paradise." "Those men," Jaramir said quietly, "they couldn't follow you here?" "I don't think so. I used my mother's maiden name to buy the train ticket, and I made sure to leave no forwarding information." Cordelia looked up at him, trying to read his expression in the dim light. "I know this changes things between us. I'm not the respectable woman you thought you were getting." "Stop." His voice was firm but gentle. "You're not responsible for your father's sins, and you're certainly not less respectable for protecting yourself from dangerous men." Relief flooded through her like warm honey. "You're not angry that I deceived you? Did you lie about anything that matters? About your character, your values, your desire for a true marriage?" When she shook her head, he stepped closer. "Then there's nothing to forgive. If anything, I admire your courage even more." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Cordelia was helping Mrs. Henley in the kitchen when a knock at the front door interrupted their peaceful routine. Through the window, she could see an unfamiliar horse tied at the hitching post of fine bay gelding with expensive tack. "I'll get it," Mrs. Henley called. But Cordelia's blood had already turned to ice at the sight of the tall, well-dressed man standing on the porch dot. She knew that silhouette, those cold blue eyes, that predatory smile that had haunted her nightmares for months. Marcus Rothwell, her father's chief creditor and the most persistent of her unwanted suitors. "Is Miss Cordelia Ashworth staying here?" His cultured Boston accent sounded obscenely out of place in the rustic boarding house. "I've come quite a long way to collect what's owed me." Mrs. Henley's voice turned arctic. "And you are?" "A family friend." Miss Ashworth left Boston rather suddenly, without settling certain obligations. Cordelia forced herself to walk to the front door on unsteady legs. Better to face this now than let him terrorize Mrs. Henley with his veiled threats. "Hello, Marcus," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I thought I made my position clear before I left Boston." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Your position, my dear, is considerably more precarious than you imagined. Your father's debts have grown with interest, and I've taken the liberty of purchasing them from his other creditors. You now owe me, and me alone, a sum that I think you'll find quite motivating." He handed her a legal document with flourishes of official seals and signatures. The amount made her knees weak. "Of course," Marcus continued smoothly, "I'm prepared to be reasonable. Cancel this rustic marriage charade, return to Boston as my wife, and the debt disappears. A generous offer, considering the alternatives." "And if I refuse?" Cordelia's chin lifted with defiance she didn't feel. "Then I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. Debtor's prison is quite unpleasant, untold. And there's the matter of fraud using false names, fleeing across state lines to avoid legitimate debts. The federal marshals take such things seriously." Mrs. Henley moved protectively beside Cordelia. "This is harassment, plain and simple." "I'm sending for the sheriff." "By all means," Marcus smiled. "Sheriff Donovan is an old friend of mine now. We had quite an enlightening conversation this morning about federal warrants and extradition procedures." The room seemed to spin around. Cordelia, all her dreams of safety, of love, of a home where she belonged crashing down like a house of cards. "I need time to consider your offer," she managed. "Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel for the next 3 days. After that, he shrugged eloquently. "Well, after that, the decision will be taken out of your hands entirely." He tipped his hat and left, his expensive boots clicking against the porch boards like a death knell. Cordelia sank into Mrs. Henley's arms, finally allowing the tears to come. "I have to go back with him. I can't let Jeremiah and Maggie get caught up in this mess. If I'm arrested, if there's a scandal—" "Hush now," Mrs. Henley soothed. "We'll figure something out. That man's got the stink of lies all over him." But even as the older woman offered comfort, Cordelia was already packing mentally. She'd lived one life under the shadow of her father's mistakes. She wouldn't destroy the happiness of the man and child who'd come to mean everything to her. If love meant sacrifice, then she'd sacrifice her own dreams to protect theirs. She just prayed Jeremiah would understand and forgive her for the heartbreak she was about to bring to his door. Cordelia spent the afternoon writing letters, one to Jeremiah, one to Maggie, and a final one to Mrs. Henley, with instructions for forwarding her few belongings. Her hands shook as she folded the papers, sealing her own fate with every crease. She planned to leave on the morning train, accepting Marcus's ultimatum before he could make good on his threats. Better to sacrifice her own happiness than watch the law destroy the family she'd grown to love. But Maggie Blackthorne had other plans. The child appeared at Cordelia's door just as the sun was setting, her small face set with determination that would have done her father proud. "Mrs. Henley told me about that mean man, the one who wants to take you away." "Maggie, sweetheart," Cordelia began, but the little girl held up an imperious hand. "I'm not finished. Daddy taught me that when someone you love is in trouble, you don't just stand there crying. You do something." Maggie's storm-colored eyes blazed with righteous fury. "So I did something." Before Cordelia could ask what that meant, boots thundered up the boarding house steps. The front door flew open with enough force to rattle the windows, and Jeremiah strode in like an avenging angel wrapped in trail dust and barely controlled violence. "Where is he?" His voice could have cut glass. "Where's the bastard who thinks he can threaten my family?" "Jeremiah, please," Cordelia started. But he was already pulling her into his arms, his hands frantically checking her for injury. "Maggie told me everything. About your father's debts, about this Rothwell character's threats." His eyes blazed with protective fury. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch you?" "No, but you don't understand." Cordelia tried to step back to put distance. between them before her resolve crumbled entirely. The amount he claims I owe, it's impossible. Even if we sold everything you own, it wouldn't be enough. And he has legal documents, threats of federal marshals. Let me worry about the legal documents, Jeremiah said grimly. Right now, I need to know, do you want to go back to Boston with him? Of course not. But if I don't, he'll destroy you both. Your reputation, your business, maybe even the only thing that would destroy me is losing you. Jeremiah cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle despite the steel in his voice. Do you love me, Cordelia? Do you want to be my wife, not just in name but in truth? The question hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Cordelia looked into his storm-colored eyes and saw her own desperate hope reflected. There, yes, she whispered. God help me, yes. Then that's all that matters. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Everything else is just details. Pretty big details, Mrs. Henley interjected dryly from the doorway. That Rothwell fellow's got enough legal firepower to cause serious trouble. Jeremiah's smile was sharp as a blade. Then it's lucky I sent for some firepower of my own. As if summoned by his words, another horse approached outside. This rider wore a badge that caught the lamplight, and when he removed his hat, Cordelia saw silver hair and kind eyes in a weathered face. That's U.S. Marshal Tom Bradley, Jeremiah explained. Old friend of mine from my cavalry days. I sent Maggie to telegraph him this afternoon. The marshal knocked politely before entering, his presence somehow managing to calm Cordelia's racing heart. He had the air of a man who'd seen everything and couldn't be surprised by human foolishness anymore. Miss Ashworth, he said courteously, I understand you've been having some legal difficulties with a gentleman from Boston. He claims I owe him money, a great deal of money. Cordelia showed him Marcus's documents with trembling hands. He says he'll have me arrested if I don't return to Boston and marry him. Marshal Bradley examined the papers with professional thoroughness, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. These signatures look mighty fresh for documents that supposedly date back months, and some of these seals ... He held one up to the light. I've seen enough forgeries to recognize the work. You think they're fake? Hope fluttered in Cordelia's chest like a caged bird. I think Mr. Rothwell is about to have a very unpleasant conversation with federal authorities about mail fraud and interstate harassment. The marshal's smile was decidedly predatory. Seems he made one crucial mistake. He brought his criminal enterprise across state lines. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see Marcus Rothwell riding up to the boarding house, his face set in lines of cold determination. Right on time, Marshal Bradley murmured, pinning his badge to his vest where it couldn't be missed. Jeremiah, you might want to keep the ladies back. This could get interesting. As Marcus dismounted and strode toward the porch, Cordelia felt Jeremiah's protective presence at her back. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The man who'd haunted her nightmares was about to discover that Western justice had its own way of dealing with Eastern predators. Marcus Rothwell's confident swagger faltered the moment he spotted the federal marshal's badge glinting in the lamplight. His pale blue eyes darted between the assembled faces like a cornered animal calculating escape routes. Mr. Rothwell, I presume, Marshal Bradley said conversationally, stepping forward. I'm U.S. Marshal Tom Bradley. I'd like to have a word with you about some documents you've been showing around town. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Marcus replied, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool mountain evening. Miss Ashworth owes a legitimate debt. Funny thing about legitimate debts, the marshal interrupted, spreading Marcus's papers across Mrs. Henley's dining table. They tend to have consistent signatures. Now these here signatures, they're all just a hair different from each other. Almost like someone was trying to copy handwriting they weren't entirely familiar with. Marcus's face went white. You can't prove? Oh, but I can. Marshall Bradley pulled a telegram from his pocket. Wired the Boston authorities this afternoon. Seems your little debt-buying business has been operating without proper licensing. Also seems 3 other young women have filed complaints about similar threats and forged documents. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Cordelia felt Jeremir's hand settle protectively on her shoulder, anchoring her as her world shifted once again. Furthermore, the marshal continued, crossing state lines to defraud citizens makes this a federal matter. You're under arrest for mail fraud, forgery, and interstate harassment. As Marshal Bradley moved to place Marcus in shackles, the man's civilized facade cracked entirely. You don't understand, he snarled at Cordelia. I came all this way for you. I could have given you everything: wealth, position, a proper life. She already has a proper life, Jeremir said quietly, but his voice carried the finality of judgment. One she chose freely, without coercion or lies. Marcus lunged forward then, whether to attack or to plead, no one would ever know. Jeremir stepped smoothly between him and Cordelia, his hand finding the gun at his hip with practiced ease. The marshal's shackles clicked shut before violence could erupt. You'll regret this, Marcus hissed as he was led toward the door. All of you will regret this. The only thing I regret, Cordelia said, finding her voice at last, is not seeing you for what you really were sooner. After Marcus was loaded into the marshal's wagon and the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, a profound quiet settled. Over the boarding house, Mrs. Henley busied herself making tea, while Maggie curled up in Cordelia's lap like a contented kitten. Is the mean man really gone forever? The little girl asked softly. Forever and always, Jeremir confirmed, settling beside them on the settee. He can't hurt any of us ever again. Good. Maggie yawned hugely. 'Cause I was getting tired of protecting everyone all by myself. Cordelia laughed despite her emotional exhaustion. You did magnificently, sweetheart. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been so brave. Daddy says brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. Maggie looked up at her with solemn eyes. Were you scared, Miss Cordelia? Terrified, Cordelia admitted. But having you and your daddy here made me braver than I ever thought I could be. Later, after Maggie had fallen asleep and Mrs. Henley had tactfully retired to her own quarters, Cordelia and Jeremir found themselves alone on the front porch, watching the stars emerge over the Montana peaks. I keep thinking this is all a dream, Cordelia whispered, her hand finding his in the darkness. That I'll wake up back in that cramped Boston tenement, still running from shadows. It's real, Jeremir assured her, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. You're safe, you're free, and if you'll still have me, you're going to be my wife. Cordelia turned to face him fully, drinking in the beloved plains of his face in the moonlight. I got off at the wrong train stop, she marveled. No, he said softly, pulling her closer until she was cradled against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. You got off at exactly the right one. Maggie knew it from the first moment she saw you. I think maybe I did too. How could? You know, we were complete strangers. Jeremir was quiet for a long moment, his hand stroking her hair with reverent gentleness. Do you remember what I wrote in my letters about offering a home where laughter echoes again? I thought I was making an empty promise. This house, this town, even my own heart, everything felt hollow after Isabel died. But then you came. And suddenly there was music in the silence again. Tears slipped down Cordelia's cheeks, but they were tears of joy now, not sorrow. When do you want to have the wedding? Tomorrow, he said immediately, making her laugh. "Or as soon as Reverend Mills can arrange it. I've waited long enough to make you officially mine." "What about Maggie? Shouldn't we ask her permission?" If summoned by her name, a small voice piped up from the doorway. "Daddy, Miss Cordelia, are you getting married now? 'Cause if you are, I want to throw flower petals and wear my Sunday dress with the blue ribbons." They turned to find Maggie, in her nightgown, rubbing sleepy eyes but grinning with delight. "Were you eavesdropping, young lady?" Jeremiah asked with mock sternness. "Only a little bit," Maggie admitted without shame. "I wanted to make sure Miss Cordelia said yes." "She did say yes, didn't she?" "She did," Cordelia confirmed, opening her arms for the little girl who launched herself into them with enthusiasm. "And yes, you can throw flower petals and wear your dress with the blue ribbons. And can we have a real wedding cake? With 3 layers and sugar roses?" "If that's what you want," Jeremiah agreed, his voice rough with emotion as he watched his daughter and his bride-to-be plan their future together. "And can Miss Cordelia be my real mama after? Not just pretend?" "The realest mama you could ever have," Cordelia promised, sealing the vow with a kiss to the child's forehead. 3 weeks later, on a perfect September morning with golden aspen leaves dancing in the mountain breeze, Cordelia Ashworth became Cordelia Blackthorne in the little whitewashed church of Willowbrook. She wore her mother's pearls and carried wildflowers that Maggie had picked at dawn. And when Jeremiah kissed her at the altar, she tasted forever in that sweet promise. Marshall Bradley gave her away. Mrs. Henley wept into her handkerchief, and Maggie threw rose petals with such enthusiasm that half the congregation was covered in fragrant pink snow dot as they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. Cordelia caught sight of the train station through the church windows, the platform where a desperate little girl had grabbed her skirts and begged her not to leave. Getting off at the wrong stop, she mused, had led her to exactly the right life. That evening, as they tucked Maggie into bed in what was now officially their home, a rambling ranch house with mountain views and a garden where children's laughter would soon echo, the little girl had one final question. "Mama Cordelia," she said solemnly, testing out the name with obvious pleasure, "do you think God planned for you to get off at the wrong stop, so you'd find us?" Cordelia glanced at Jeremiah, who was leaning against the doorframe with a smile that held all the warmth of home. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes what looks like a mistake is really just love finding its way. Like how rivers find the sea even when they have to go around mountains. Exactly like that, sweetheart." Satisfied with this explanation, Maggie snuggled deeper into her quilts. "I'm glad you got lost, Mama, 'cause now we're all found." Later, in the privacy of their own room, Jeremiah pulled Cordelia into his arms with the wonder of a man still amazed by his good fortune. "Any regrets about that wrong train stop?" he murmured against her hair. "Only one," Cordelia replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "I regret that I didn't get off sooner." Outside their window, the Montana mountains stood sentinel under a canopy of stars, protecting the little family that had found each other through providence, persistence, and the unshakable faith of a 7-year-old girl who knew love when she saw it dot, and in the morning, when the first light touched the peaks with gold, Cordelia would wake in her husband's arms and know with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, not because of where she'd meant to go, but because of where her heart had always been heading, home, at last.